The rain hammered against the workshop
Daddy,
window as
what's
Alina's
wrong?
trembling hands stitched the final hem of Mrs. Patterson's wedding dress. At 23, she'd grown accustomed to the ache in her fingers, the perpetual exhaustion that came with being the sole provider for herself and two tiny souls who depended on her completely. But tonight, as thunder rolled across the Chicago skyline, she glanced at the makeshift crib in the corner where 2-year-old Maya and Lucas slept peacefully, their small chests rising and falling in perfect synchrony, and felt something break open inside her chest. She hadn't planned to become a mother. She certainly hadn't planned to become a mother to twins she'd found abandoned in a cardboard box outside the textile factory where she worked late nights. Yet here she was, 3 years after that freezing November evening, loving these children with a ferocity that sometimes frightened her. The memory still haunted her dreams. She'd been leaving work around midnight, exhausted from a double shift, when she heard the crying. At first, she thought it was cats fighting in the alley, but something made her investigate. There, nestled in a box lined with a thin, stained blanket, were two infants who couldn't have been more than a few days old. No note, no explanation, just two perfect, helpless babies left to face the brutal Chicago winter alone. Elena had scooped them up without hesitation, wrapped them in her own coat, and rushed them to the hospital. The police searched for the parents, of course, but no one ever came forward. After 6 months in the foster system, during which Elena visited them every single day, she'd completed the adoption paperwork with her meager savings and brought them home to her tiny studio apartment above the seamstress shop. Everyone had called her crazy. Her landlord had threatened eviction. Her own mother, calling from the Philippines, had wept with worry about how Elena would manage. But Elena had looked into those 4 innocent eyes and seen herself reflected back, a girl who'd come to America at 18 with nothing but a sewing kit and dreams of building something better. She understood what it meant to be unwanted, to be considered disposable. She refused to let these babies feel that way for even one more day. The years that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, cheap formula, second-hand clothes, and love. So much love it sometimes felt like her heart would burst. Elena's seamstress business grew slowly through word of mouth, her reputation for exquisite detail work spreading through Chicago's wedding industry. She sewed during the twins' naps, between feedings, after bedtime, creating magic with her needle and thread while surviving on coffee and determination. The twins thrived despite their humble circumstances. Maya became a chattering, curious whirlwind who asked 1,000 questions daily. Lucas was quieter, more observant, with an uncanny ability to sense when Elena was overwhelmed and needed an extra hug. Then came the knock that would change everything. It was a Saturday afternoon in early spring when Elena answered the door to find a man in an impeccably tailored suit standing in her workshop. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that held a haunting mixture of hope and devastation. Behind him stood a woman with a briefcase who introduced herself as a private investigator. "My name is Alexander Chen," the man said, his voice cracking slightly. "I believe you're raising my children." Elena's world tilted sideways. The twins were playing with building blocks nearby, oblivious to the earthquake about to shake their small universe. She invited the strangers in, her protective instincts roaring to life even as her hands went cold with fear. The story Alexander told was heartbreaking. 5 years ago, he'd been a struggling entrepreneur, working 100-hour weeks to launch his tech startup. His girlfriend, Sarah, had been struggling with severe postpartum depression after giving birth to the twins. Alexander had been overseas securing crucial funding when it happened. Sarah, in the grip of a psychotic episode, had disappeared with the babies. By the time Alexander returned and realized they were gone, Sarah had vanished completely. The police found Sarah 3 weeks later. She'd taken her own life, but there was no sign of the twins. Despite hiring investigators and spending every dollar he had, Alexander found nothing. His company eventually succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, making him a millionaire many times over, but the money meant nothing without his children. He'd never stopped searching. A recent breakthrough in DNA database technology had finally given him a lead when the hospital where Elena had brought the twins had entered their DNA into a national registry. The match came back just 2 weeks ago, bringing Alexander to Elena's doorstep with proof of paternity and 5 years of accumulated anguish in his eyes. Elena looked at Maya and Lucas, now 5 years old, playing innocently across the room. They knew her as Mama. She was the only parent they'd ever known. The thought of losing them carved a hollow space in her chest so vast she could barely breathe. But when she looked at Alexander, she saw a father who'd been robbed of watching his children grow, a man who'd never held them, never heard their first words, never kissed away their tears. She saw his love and his loss reflected in every line of his face. "What do you want?" Elena whispered, already knowing the answer would destroy her. "I want to know my children," Alexander said, tears streaming down his face. "But I've spent weeks learning about you, Ms. Reyes. I know what you've sacrificed. I know you've been both mother and father to them. I know they adore you. I'm not here to take them away from the only mother they've ever known." What followed were the most difficult months of Elena's life. Slowly, carefully, Alexander was introduced into the twins' world as a friend, then as someone special, and finally with the truth told gently, age-appropriately, with a child psychologist's guidance. The twins were confused at first, then curious. They had a father. Why hadn't he been there before? Elena and Alexander explained together, holding nothing back in terms the children could understand about illness, loss, and love. Alexander never tried to replace Elena. Instead, he honored her role, respected her bond with the children, and gradually built his own relationships with Maya and Lucas. He bought the building where Elena's workshop was located and renovated it, giving her a beautiful storefront and a proper 3-bedroom apartment upstairs. He set up trust funds for the twins' education. He hired assistants so Elena could work less and spend more time with the children. But most importantly, he treated Elena not as an obstacle or temporary guardian, but as family. "You gave them life when I couldn't," he told her one evening as they watched the twins play in the park. "You're their mother. Nothing will ever change that. I'm just grateful to be given a chance to be their father." 2 years later, Elena stood in that same park wearing a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, her hand clasped in Alexander's, as Maya and Lucas served as flower girl and ring bearer at their wedding. What had begun as shared custody had evolved into genuine friendship, then partnership, and finally love. Not the passionate, whirlwind romance of movies, but something deeper, a love built on mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and devotion to 2 children who'd brought them together. The young seamstress who'd once survived on instant noodles now ran a thriving bridal boutique, but she never forgot where she'd come from. She and Alexander established a foundation supporting single parents and children in foster care, giving back to the community that had helped her survive those difficult early years. Sometimes Maya and Lucas asked about their birth mother, and Elena and Alexander told them the truth with compassion. Sarah had been sick, but she'd loved them. Mental illness didn't make someone a bad person, just someone who needed help they didn't receive in time. The twins would carry her memory without shame, understanding that families came in all forms, built not just by biology but by choice, sacrifice, and boundless love. On quiet evenings, Elena would watch Alexander reading bedtime stories to the twins and remember that freezing night she'd found them. She'd thought she was saving them, but perhaps they'd saved her too, teaching her that family wasn't about blood or wealth or perfect circumstances. It was about showing up, holding on, and choosing love even when everything else seemed impossible. In the end, that choice had transformed all their lives, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest act of human kindness.